Welcome to Dawg Day Afternoon. I am Gilles Gallant with FTNBets on a show powered by the FTN Network. Had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we are back on live now every Tuesday, every Thursday, every week on the FTN Network YouTube channel. And I'm joined by my producer extraordinaire, DeQuan Young. We call him Quan for short around here. Quan, welcome to the show.
Hey, yo, today has been a day, but I'm excited to hear about not only the picks from Cutri and yourself, which I may have just, gave everybody who the guest was, but I'm excited for you to tell what happened to you this weekend.
Yeah, well, you're right. It is March Madness week, so we'd be remiss here at Dawg Day Afternoon if we didn't have the college basketball expert of FTNBets. Mike Cutri is going to join us here in a few minutes to go through the entire 2022 March Madness bracket. We're going to fill it out live right here on air. Mike is up over 56 units of profit for college basketball this season, like nearly a 30% ROI. So again, this is the guy that you want to be listening to before you fill out your brackets. Does a top 25 ranking for college hoops teams every week for the FTNBets site. So again, very knowledgeable dude, somebody that I'm wanting to talk to before I fill out my brackets, because the reality is that you're either a master at one thing or you're a master at none. And I didn't want to spread myself so thin this year. Normally I focus very heavily on NBA and NFL, and college hoops just kind of fell through the cracks, Quan, unfortunately. And that's why we got my man Mike coming on here in a few minutes. But you're right. Something did happen to me this past weekend. And for anybody who follows me on Twitter, probably didn't know that I had this level of, I guess, pettiness in me. I think everybody has a little bit in them if they really search for it. But essentially, I was chronicling a mishap by my neighbor who had a mid-'80s Corvette parked outside of his house. And he had both windows open in the middle of a huge rainstorm. And it was hilarious to me. And if you go to my Twitter account, you can see I was posting kind of hourly updates and just of what was happening. And Quan, I just wanted to know, when you were following along with seeing what I was posting, like, what was your first reaction when you saw this stuff of me tweeting this out?
There is a certain level of spite that I aspire to have. And what you displayed this Saturday, it was a microcosm of where I want, like that, just watching it go down throughout the entire day. I was sitting around and I was like, oh, we get another update. And then George came through with
this is the best. Like, this maybe like followed him off my couch. Like, when I saw this, I was like, this is perfect. Oh my God. Yeah. But George came through clutch. And, I had a few people comment throughout the ordeal, even though it was just a one-sided ordeal, because I don't think he even knew that I was posting about it, about, hey man, you should be the bigger man, you should go out there and maybe cover it up, go tell him, call him. Well, let's give a little background first on why it got to this point. So I'm going to give you a quick little timeline here of my neighbor and my relationship and just how quickly it is. So we've been neighbors for about 5 years. First year, like any neighbor, honeymoon period, you know what I mean? Hey, you want to borrow my snowblower? Cordial stuff, and that's fine. But something about 2 years ago just went off with him. I'm not going to get into his personal life or whatever, but essentially just it's been an issue ever since. And it's just been a running grocery list of things where it's not necessarily like one egregious thing where I'm going to just basically ruin this guy's day. It was just more like, okay, it's just this thing, and this thing. And then when you actually add it all up and total it, you're like, man, this guy sucks. So like, just a couple of instances, Quan, like, for example, some people probably saw the four-wheeler in the picture. That four-wheeler, one time he left the four-wheeler running on the front lawn and then just went somewhere, went to the store. I don't know where he went, but he was gone for like 15 to 20 minutes and the four-wheeler was just sitting there idling on the front lawn. And then later that day, in the evening, like, my kids are in bed, it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm not going to pretend like people can't be loud, but he's outside revving the shit out of this four-wheeler and Corvette at like 11 o'clock at night, where I'm just like, okay, like, this is a little bit much. And, I was just like, okay. Then there's another thing, like, we got a shared space of lawn. He has never mowed it. We would always do it. Then the one day he does actually mow it randomly in the summer, pulls off even probably a more spiteful move than I did. He mows only his half. So I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like, sends his dogs out. They'll shit in my yard. He doesn't pick it up, And then like the crux of it, there's two things that happened. So last August, it's my daughter's 4th birthday party. She's pumped. We're all in the backyard. We got 20 to 30 people in the backyard, lots of kids, lots of just, bouncy castle, whatever. He decides at that point to pull out a chainsaw and starts cutting trees and stuff in his backyard while we're doing this. Like, and there's 20 to 30. It's not like we were out there for just got there. Like, we were probably out there for like at least a half hour to an hour. But yeah, you can't wait an hour. Like, it's not like this party is going all day. It's a 4-year-old's birthday party. It's probably going to last maybe another hour at most. But no, he had to do the chainsaw routine right at that point. And then finally it came to a head where I was like, F this guy. About 2 months ago, and I actually had to go on Main Streets about an hour later and actually explain what happened because I was so fired up. 2 months ago, huge snowstorm. I'm shoveling all morning. Like, I had to do like 2 or 3, flights of it because it was just coming down fast. Then after I'm done and the snow starts to stop, I see him jump on his 4-wheeler, starts plowing his own driveway. And I look at the window and like my entire end of my driveway is filled with snow that he's pushing to this big pile off to the side. And like, I go out to yell at him. I'm like, man, this is not cool. Like, I just shoveled all this. What are you doing? And he, in turn, just starts yelling back at me, just like some lame insult, like almost like, why don't you go back inside with your long hair? And I was like, ooh, sick burn. And like my kids are watching me from the door. And I'm not going to just like start popping off with this guy like anymore. So I just kind of let it sizzle. And then we fast forward to last Saturday. It's pouring rain, weather warnings across the board. We put our garbage cans and stuff, like loose stuff, away just because of the wind. We don't want it to blow away. I look outside and I notice he's got both windows open on that maroon Corvette. And I'm just like, mwah, all right, let's just sit here. And because I was going to make picks on Saturday and I was like, no, this is too good. I'm just going to chronicle this all day. and it was awesome. It was hilarious to me. So you can go through my timeline and you can see kind of the updates. Like, one of the funnier updates is because I tried to just go take a peek. Was on the driver's side. There was probably like a puddle of this big, like on the floor, and a puddle accumulating on the passenger side. And there's just a flattened like McDonald's bag that's just drenched. And I'm just like, this is too much. And, a lot of people were like, how come you didn't call him? How come you didn't because I don't know what happened. Like, I used to have his cell phone number like 2 or 3 years ago. I tried to text him. I can't reach him and he's not home. So what am I going to do? Just write a note, put it in his mailbox. Like, hey, you left your windows open. Like, yeah, thanks, bud. Like, what am I going to do? So anyway, all in all, I think if there was a Spite Olympics or, or maybe like just a little Chappelle reference, like I really felt like I was making my submission for the player haters ball. Serious. Just like while all hot tubs cold, like all that kind of stuff. Right. So to give a further update, he that night, the Corvette disappeared. He must have took it somewhere. I came back when I was tweeting out. He was probably just walking around his driveway. You just mutter and stuff. I was just like, whatever. I'm not bothering with him. He looked a little unhinged at that point. He's probably pretty pissed off about what happened. So, and then the next day, no joke, Corvette back in the driveway, looks amazing. Like, it looked like he went and got it cleaned, everything else. So I was just like, no harm, no foul. Looks like the Corvette's okay. And I got to watch you probably lose, $500 to $1,000, probably whatever you had to pay just to get that car detailed.
All evens out in the end.
Yeah. So for me, I have no issue of how that transpired. I have no issue with how I reported it. If he sees me, I'll just be like, hey, man, that's just the way it goes. That at the end of the day, Quan, that's all I got to say about it. It's just if you're going to be a neighbor, be cordial. You know what I mean? Like, just if you're that, like, because some of the stuff that I'm talking about here, it's either one of two things. You're either so oblivious that you're almost borderline stupid with some of that crap that you're doing, or you're just an asshole. And either way, that's somebody I don't really want to associate with anyway. So I'll leave it at that. But we're going to get started here talking about the bracket. I'm going to get Mike Cutri to come on here and help me fill out this bracket. But before we fill out our March Madness bracket, have you checked out the FTNBets March Madness Bracket Challenge? It's free to enter. You can win cash prizes for a top finish. First place is $1,000. That's easy cash in your hand. Second place, $350. Third place is 150. It's just like a lot of these March Madness bracket pools, where the points increase based on the further rounds. So you want to try to pick teams to go as farther as possible. And it's pretty simple. Just use your email to sign up at FTNBets. It's one entry per email, so not per household. So if you have multiple emails, you can try to add a couple more entries for that. So just to increase your chances of winning, you can get your family members to sign up and pick the winners for each game. The person with the highest score after the championship game wins the prize. Make sure to enter before tip-off on the first game on Thursday, and you're all set. You go to ftnbets.com for more details, and also make sure to follow ftnbets.com on Twitter. We're going to bring Mike Cutri on now to fill out a bracket right after this. Let's take a quick break. Welcome back to Dawg Day Afternoon. We've got my man, Mike Cutri here. Mike, welcome to the show. Glad to have you on. How are you feeling heading into this week? Do you feel maybe a little different in years past? Like, what's your mindset entering this tournament?
I mean, this is my Super Bowl, so I'm ecstatic. And you grind for 3-4 months of the season, and you grind up until you get to this point in the tournament. So it's just everything coming together. It's kind of bittersweet because the season's coming to an end, but also super excited because all of the hard work you put in kind of culminates to the tournament. And who doesn't love March Madness?
I know, and that's the thing is that even me as as a betting expert, in certain sports, even though I have not followed college basketball very much this season, I still have every intention of betting it. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be dropping my normal amount of money that I would normally do for like NFL and NBA, just because it is more of an unknown. But that being said, it would be impossible for me to stay away from betting on this because, again, it is probably the best thing to watch and follow year round, just from that standpoint. The question I was going to ask you, though, obviously first 4 games start tonight, Mike, and we're probably pretty aware at this point now of how first 4 seeds have done in this tournament, at least just maybe making a Sweet 16 or, in some cases like a Syracuse or VCU for going even further back of making it all the way to the Final Four. When we're picking out our games for the brackets, Mike, do you weigh the results of these first 4 games heavily before you start kind of making your bracket choices long-term?
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, the tournament is very matchup centric, right? Mm-hmm. So matchups, play a big part in the way that I like to pick my bracket out. So I'm obviously going to try to wait until these games play out before the brackets are actually due on Thursday. But I do kind of fill out a core of my bracket out prior and, have an idea of where I'm going to go, how these games kind of play out. For sure. And
that makes sense. And just for me as Joe Casual, I'm the type I'm like, forget about it. Let's just pick them. Let's go, like kind of thing. So just keep that in mind. If you are looking to kind of like tail or whatever else, like Mike will advise us as we go to make sure that we're, making sure that we're not overlooking a play-in game winner. Like, for example, in the first region, playing Alabama, for example, we may have to just maybe look a little deeper into that before we just assume that Alabama is just going to win no matter what. So Quan, why don't you bring up the bracket here, and we're going to get started right away. We're going to have a look at this would be the West region. Gonzaga, number 1 overall seed, 3rd year in a row, technically, if you take into consideration the 2020 version of the tournament that was canceled because they were going to be the number 1 overall seed in that tourney as well. First thoughts when you look at the West, Mike, did Gonzaga get a bit of a raw deal here with the way that this field is set up in this region?
I think you can kind of say that in a way. They're the number 1 overall seed, and this is definitely not the easiest bracket. The easiest bracket is or I'm sorry, the easiest region would be the one where Kansas is number 1 seed. So they if you look at it at that perspective, they got hosed a little bit there. But, the Zags are a good topic to start off with because you see a lot of people kind of, saying that the Zags are frauds. They don't play anybody. They're in a weak conference. The WCC sucks. They're not battle tested. And, I'm going to tell you that is the most lazy take I've ever heard. And
I thought you were going to curse. I was going to say, just let it fly, man, because that's
no,
what
it
is.
I'm going to keep it PG for you, but that is the most lazy take that you can have, in my opinion. I mean, the Zags are legit. Mark Few, he tests them in the non-conference. They always have the most, the hardest non-conference schedule out there in the country. The WCC is actually really good this year. They got 3 teams in. If you look at a conference like the American, where Houston is in, they only got 2 teams in. So that's a bad take as well. And listen, if you look at Gonzaga's body of work for the last maybe 5 or 6 years, like their tournament success, I'm going to read it off: Elite 8, Sweet 16, national title runner-up
Against Carolina. Yep.
Sweet 16, Elite 8. National title runner-up. I mean, like, what else more do you want from this team?
You know what I think it is, Mike? I think it's that year. Do you remember when they got I don't know if it was the number 1 overall seed, but they got a 1 seed when Kelly Olynyk was their center, and that was when a lot of those things that you brought up about the narrative of the WCC's weaknesses and overall just who they're playing and their out of conference schedule being weaker. I think that people might have gotten too hung up on just that one season. Like, I'm pretty sure they lost in the second round that year. And I think that's the one thing, is that as we've been going forward, the program has just only went up because the amount of talent that they're being able to recruit. Even guys like an Andrew Nembhard, who I follow just because I'm following NBA and just following Canadian hoopers. When he transferred from Florida, like, I thought that was a huge get to be able to pair him with Jalen Suggs, to the point I thought he was actually leaving in the draft this past season or off season, and then he stayed aboard. So, and you're right about the out of conference schedule. So let's start just making a pick then. Let's just get first pick out of the way. Quan, let's have Gonzaga over Georgia State. All right.
There we go.
Now,
I do want to mention something, though, about that matchup, and just from a pure betting perspective, right? So Georgia State is actually a very talented 16 team, probably one of the best you're going to see in a short time period, and as brackets get released. And from a betting perspective, it opened up at 26.5. I kind of grabbed it at 25.5. It's down to 23.5, but I still think there's some value there. I mean, Georgia State, they struggled during the regular season, but it was more because they were kind of filled up with a couple injuries, but they have a really solid backcourt, and they have a really solid transition defense and really solid protecting the rim, which is kind of what the Gonzaga likes to do. So from a betting perspective, Georgia State is definitely an angle I'm looking at here, but by no means picking them to beat Gonzaga. But that's just something to watch out for if you want trying to make some.
All right, so Mike is saying Georgia State is not UMBC. We're not going to see that kind of matchup, but from a 23.5 point spread standpoint, very live dog if you're looking for a good plus spread, at least in these 1 seeds. So with the 1 seed 16 matchups, we probably won't dive too deep into them, just because outside of that one loss, obviously, it just doesn't happen. So, but the 8-9 is always a little tricky, just because, even though they don't usually have great success moving on to the third round, just because they always usually have to play the 1 seed in the second round. Boise State and Memphis. This matchup for me immediately, and again, as a Joe Casual, you look at Memphis, you look at Boise State, you think basketball programs, you think Penny Hardaway, you see the recruits that they've got, and you think, well, why would the Broncos even be able to be a challenge in this game? But Memphis is really underwhelmed, at least in my opinion, with Penny as the coach. And I don't even know if, obviously the 9 seed is nominal, but I just didn't even feel like they really were a tournament team just based on the way that the season has gone. But where are we leaning here? Because my initial pick was going to be Boise State. Is that kind of wrong, or are you thinking Memphis is going to be able to get this matchup?
So it's a very interesting matchup. You're right. Memphis did struggle at points during the season. They played much better down the stretch where they kind of got a little healthier. But Penny has struggled with, I guess, team chemistry with this team throughout the year. If I'm looking around to see what most people are doing, I am seeing a lot of people picking Memphis to make a little bit of a run during this tournament, which I kind of disagree with. And we're going to get kind of into this talk throughout the tournament. But when you're filling out your bracket and you want to fill out a bracket that's going to, ultimately have a chance to come in first place and win you some money, you have to look at leverage spots, right? So in a matchup where these two teams are very closely matched, both teams great defensive teams. They both have a lot of length, a lot of athleticism. The only difference is that Memphis likes to get out in transition, where Boise State really wants to make this a half-court game. And I think Boise State can dictate the tempo. And also, if I look at coaching, this is Penny's first NCAA tournament team. He's only been coaching for 3 or 4 years. They have a really young roster. I'm going to be on the Boise side, and it's a combination of pace, coaching, and then also maybe taking a little bit of leverage spot. If I'm going to get 40% of people picking Boise and 60 on Memphis, I'm going to go Boise.
Yeah, so I'm with you. We're going to take the Broncos to advance here. Quan, you can go ahead. We don't really have to go too far, I think, into Gonzaga, Boise State. I do think Boise State will pose a bigger challenge, obviously, than Georgia State. But I'm going to take, at least just for now, Gonzaga to get to the Sweet 16. We can talk about whether or not they can advance over the other teams on this other side of the region here in a second, because I really wanted to talk to you about UConn and New Mexico, because I've been just kind of doing my normal research, and just seeing like what the pulse is. And there's been a little bit of buzz about this Huskies team, about making a legitimate run and potentially taking down Gonzaga. Can you tell me a little bit more about whether or not you think New Mexico State should win this game, or if it's going to be a UConn route?
So New Mexico State is a great team, but I don't think this is the best matchup for them to pull up the upset. And, everybody's looking for that 12/5 upset. And there are spots to attack in this tournament. I don't think this is one of them. And the main reason is, this UConn team is very gritty. I mean, what do you expect? Their coach is from New Jersey. So what do you expect?
Bobby Hurley, man.
Danny Hurley. But
is it Danny Hurley?
Part of the
Hurley brothers.
Part of the Hurley family. They are very long, great defensive team. Great interior defensive team, great rebounding team. What did New Mexico State do well throughout the year is they kind of overwhelmed in their conference with their length and athleticism themselves. So they kind of do the same things UConn does, but UConn just does it better. A couple things that kind of stand out for New Mexico State that's a little worrisome is they have a really high turnover rate. They're 313th in the country in offensive turnover rate. And in order to beat this UConn team, they're going to have to hit threes, and they don't shoot the three particularly well, 216th in three-point field goal percentage. They have a couple guys who can get buckets in a hurry, but they're not very efficient. Teddy Allen, for example, if you're looking for, just a name to watch out for New Mexico State. But I'm going to have UConn advance here. Yeah,
I'm with you. I think the backcourt of UConn is going to be enough to be able to get to that pace. Now, Vermont is a very popular team coming into this, just as far as the way that they finished their conference schedule, and just kind of I think Arkansas is getting love, but at the same time, I don't think it's getting as much love as they were like entering last year's tournament. And Vermont is right now, it's a pretty popular pick to pull off the upset. I was starting to kind of look at upset ideas for this bracket, and really this is the only one that stands out to me, but I'm just, Vermont being Vermont, I don't know enough about them to feel confident in it. Why would I feel confident in being able to take a team like Vermont to overcome a team like the Razorbacks?
So Vermont is a popular upset pick. And I agree that they have a chance to win this game for sure. Am I going to pick them to upset Arkansas? I haven't fully decided yet. I'm more leaning the Arkansas side. And, one thing to mention is that, especially with people who don't follow college basketball that religiously like I do, they get hung up on, I have to pick upsets in the bracket, right? I have to find the 12/5. I have to find that 11 seed that's going to go far. And, if everybody's trying to do that, maybe the contrarian way is to pick more favorites, right? And, if you're looking at kind of Vegas odds and things like that, like the favorite's going to win more often than not. So one thing I try to keep in the back of my mind when I'm filling these out is you don't have to pick as many upsets as you kind of think you need to.
Right.
Going back to the matchup, Vermont is a very fundamentally sound team. They are the best team at defensive rebounding, and they are the best team in transition defense in the country. So you don't get any easy buckets against this Vermont team. They have two studs, Ben Shungu as one of their guards, and they have Ryan Davis, who's kind of an inside-out power forward who can get buckets in a hurry. But this Arkansas team is kind of playing better basketball towards the end of the season. They struggled in the beginning, but they really picked up their defensive play towards the end. I think they ended the season 15-3 in their last 18 games.
Wow.
And also the number one defense in SEC play, which there's a lot of good teams in the SEC. So that's a pretty impressive defensive stat.
Kentucky, Tennessee, lots of good teams, man. But those are just the two off the top. But yeah, you're right.
Exactly. So the way to beat Arkansas is they run shooters off the 3-point line. So you have to have big athletic wings that can attack the rim. I don't know if Vermont has that. And then on defense, they run a very NBA style offense where Musselman gives them a ton of freedom, which can lead to some bad decision making, in my opinion. But the way Vermont's defense is structured is they kind of pack it in a little bit. They don't pressure. So I don't see as many bad decisions coming from Note or the other guards for Arkansas. So I do think that it's going to be a close game, but I think Arkansas has too much athleticism and shot making ability to pull away at the end.
Sure. Okay. So, and I think the one thing that you made a point of before we lock in this pick for Arkansas Vermont is you can't, like, I would say you can't win your bracket in the first round, but you can definitely lose it. And that's kind of the same mentality of like a regular season, like for football or whatever else. Like if you just went all dog, you know what I mean? For example, in the first round, you will lose like your bracket. You might as well just give the money to me or donate it to charity or whatever else you wanted to do. But at the same time, I think you don't want to just blindly take all favorites. Like you don't want to do the Obama take all 4 1 seeds to make the Final Four and act like that's like a smart strategy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with you here. I'm going to take Arkansas. Then we're going to take Arkansas to advance over Vermont. But I will make it a special note in my head that there could be the potential that I just take a money line dog and Vermont might be that one. But for bracket purposes, we're going to go with Arkansas. But now we're going to move over to the Alabama, Rutgers, Notre Dame game. Now, I know obviously you might be a little bit of a issue to be able to make a confident pick when not knowing who the Crimson Tide's opponent is going to be. But honestly, man, I kind of feel like Rutgers or Notre Dame could beat Alabama. But at the same time, I feel like Alabama could probably beat any team in this tournament if they're clicking. And that's what's so frustrating about this team, because you look like just that those 2 wins. Maybe I'm just getting too hung up on Bama beating Baylor and Gonzaga. Like I'm just almost too hung up on it. Is it safe to say that I almost feel like you could just take Rutgers or Notre Dame, whoever it is, and feel kind of confident that they could beat Bama in this kind of situation?
Well, you're 100% right. Alabama is probably the most inconsistent team in this entire tournament. I mean, they have wins, like you mentioned, over Baylor and Gonzaga, but they also lost to Georgia. I mean, like, come on. And the reason is because they take so many 3-pointers, and they, look on paper, they should be a pretty decent 3-point shooting team, but they have struggled throughout the whole year shooting the 3-pointer and taking a lot of threes and not hitting a lot of them. You're going to lose to some pretty crappy teams. I do think Rutgers matches up better with Alabama than Notre Dame does, because Alabama's interior defense is so terrible and Rutgers is a much more physical team than Notre Dame. But it's so hard. Like this is a spot that's so hard to pick away just because, Alabama has really good guards. They can get hot from 3 and they can make a championship run. They're that talented. But because of the inconsistencies, I'm going to pick against them in the first round. I'm going to have this 11 seed beat.
And that's what it feels like, man. It feels like one of those teams that like just flames out in the first round after having such high expectations during the season. Again, you don't want to bet too many times just based on feeling because that will get you broke. But at the same time, it just feels like I know that Bama is probably going to be at least a 5, maybe 6-point favorite in that game, no matter if they're playing Rutgers or Notre Dame. So I just feel like this is maybe a good spot to grab maybe a money line dog. So Quan, let's walk in Rutgers and Notre Dame. I don't care who it is. They're beating Bama. Now, next matchup, this is the one that I actually have maybe a little bit of feeling that they could get to the Final Four. I actually really like Texas Tech in this spot, playing Montana State, I believe. So where I'm at right now with this is that you can look through Texas Tech's resume, and they've got some excellent wins against some really good programs this year. Not a lot of tough losses, like some losses, obviously, but like not so egregious like we were just looking at, like with Alabama's schedule. I think it's safe to say I think Texas Tech is going to advance in this game. But is there any feeling that you would say that, or just maybe doubt that maybe you could cast to my heart of where you think Texas Tech will not win this first round matchup?
I do not have any doubt that they'll lose this first round matchup against Montana State.
Lock it in, Quan. We're going Texas Tech.
So the thing with Texas Tech is you have Mark Adams at the helm, who is kind of the architect around that no middle defense that you see a lot in the Big 12.
Yeah.
He's the guy who kind of created it, and it's, worked wonders. I mean, Texas Tech, like you said, #1 ranked defense in the entire country. They're super physical underneath, and they just kick you in the mouth. And what Montana State likes to do is they like to work through the post through Jabril Bello. And, I think they're going to have a really hard time getting the ball. And they're also, once he does get the ball, he has to deal with all that length and physicality inside. It's just a bad matchup for them. So I think it's safe to say Texas Tech moves on.
So the next matchup then with Michigan State and Davidson. Obviously, everybody, even if you're a casual observer like myself, you're pretty aware of Tom Izzo's resume in March. Even though the last 2 regular seasons, I would say, is a far cry of what Michigan State used to at least represent in the Big Ten. And this year they've got a 7 seed, which, I mean, I don't really care what the seed is as long as Izzo and it's the Michigan State program. I'm always a little iffy about picking against them. But I don't know enough about Davidson this year to feel confident in picking Michigan State to fall at this stage. Do you think Michigan State is the team to maybe start looking at as a team that could advance far in this bracket and region? Or do you think it's going to be a flame out where, we just maybe start talking about how Michigan State just didn't have enough high-end talent to be able to advance?
So it's funny you bring up that Tom Izzo wins in March narrative. And to me, I think in the past that has been true. But over the last few years, I think that is long gone.
What about the year that the only year, and again, I just think of this year because that was like the last year where I was actually following college hoops front to back. I might as well have woke up out of a coma like 3 years later. But when they made the Final Four, taking down Zion and RJ Barrett and that Duke team as a 2 seed, obviously they were pretty good at that point, and they made the Final Four. They didn't obviously win the championship, but I'm just wondering, we can't get hung up on that, right? We have to look at kind of what this team is and what they can bring to the table.
Right. And, another good example of that is, if you look back 4, 5, 6 years ago, there was that whole narrative that Jay Wright can't win in March. Yep. There's a whole narrative that Tony Bennett can't win in March and Virginia went all the way. So those kind of narratives are the ones that, everybody keeps talking about, but every season is mutually exclusive from each other. Right. So those things definitely don't keep that in your mind. Izzo wins in March. Do not kind of follow that narrative.
Okay.
Do not fall into that trap. This Michigan State team has kind of been a dumpster fire down the stretch. If you look at shot quality metrics, which is a data service that kind of predicts how games should have resulted based on the quality of shots each team took. So, for example, if Michigan State is typically a 35% three-point shooting team, but they had an outlier performance and shot 50% from 3 and they won, shot quality kind of gives you the results on, okay, if they didn't outperform their 3-point shooting and they didn't hit all these contested threes, what should the actual result of the game should have been? Mm-hmm. If you look at Michigan State, they would have lost their last 13 games in a row. So the metrics are not looking good.
Analytics.
Yeah, the metrics are not looking good down the stretch. I was completely in fade mode, whoever they got matched up in this tournament. Davidson actually comes in as a very solid 10 seed. They won the regular season 8-10. Very fundamentally sound. They run this Princeton-style offense under Bob McKillop where all 5 guys can shoot. Their bigs can step out and hit threes. They ranked 8th nationally in 3-point percentage, field goal percentage. Very solid. They get back in transition where that's where Michigan State kind of can score. They're awful scoring in the half court, but they can get out in transition. Davidson's 38th percentile per synergy in transition defense. So I think this is a spot where Davidson can knock them out and get that 10/7 win.
All right. So, Quan, let's block in Davidson right now. We're going to talk about Duke in a little bit, but for me right now, I don't really want to dive too deep into Cal State Fullerton. I think Duke will win that game, even though Duke, I've seen them fall in the past in this kind of scenario. I can't even believe right now I'm forgetting CJ McCollum's team. Lehigh. Lehigh. Yeah. All right. Now, so let's lock in Duke going into the second round. Let's scroll back up. We're going to look at Gonzaga right now. And Gonzaga playing Boise State. We already have them advancing to the Sweet 16. My apologies, Broncos, but we're not going to talk about you very much more going forward. Now, a nice little second round matchup between UConn and Arkansas. Just kind of elaborating a little bit more on some of the highlights of both of these teams' strengths. Do you think UConn's offense will be enough to overpower Arkansas's, I guess, pro-based offense?
I do. So I mentioned before that Arkansas can be kind of forced into bad shot selection, bad decision-making on offense, and UConn is definitely the team that can do that. They're not going to allow anything at the rim, so they're going to make Arkansas hit a lot of tough shots. And I just think that UConn's overall kind of team makeup is something that can give Arkansas a tough time. So I have UConn.
I love it. I love it, Mike. We're going to lock in UConn now. So we got a nice little matchup between Gonzaga and UConn in the Sweet 16. Now, Texas Tech and Rutgers, Notre Dame. I already kind of mentioned about how much I enjoy Texas Tech, and I think that they're actually the team, like, in my opinion, they're the biggest challenge to Gonzaga in this bracket, but we can talk about that in a little bit. I am just going to pencil in Texas Tech going to the Sweet 16. Is that too much of an assumption to be able to take down a hypothetical matchup with Rutgers or Notre Dame?
No, that's completely fair. I think they match up well against both those teams, and I have the same. Texas Tech.
All right. Beauty. So we got Texas Tech into the Sweet 16. I also think Duke is going to get to the Sweet 16, but I thought this was going to be a potential matchup that with Duke and Michigan State. Now, we've seen these type of matchups before, like whether it be the Champions Classic or whatever else, but I'm not really 100% certain if Davidson can beat Duke in this spot. Obviously Duke right now, if you just look at it like any hypothetical draft, mock draft or whatever for the NBA, two guys that are projected to be picked in the top 10 in both Adrian Griffin and Paulo Banchero, and Williams, the center, is also like right around a lottery talent. Do you think the talent will be enough to overcome a team like Davidson, or do you think this could be a good spot for an exit for Duke?
So I do see a lot of people giving Duke some love, and I am not one of them. I think they kind of faltered down the stretch, and I actually think this Davidson team can give them a lot of problems with their very structured, a lot of off-ball cutting, a lot of backdoor cuts against a young team that started off the season pretty strong defensively, but down the stretch have really struggled. They gave up 94 points to UNC, and then over 80 to Va Tech. Davidson's offense is very similar to Virginia Tech's, where there's a lot of 5-out off-ball movement. Duke really struggled to defend that. I think it could happen again against Davidson. I'm picking Davidson to move on. I wouldn't be mad. It's kind of a shot in the dark.
I love it, man. I love hot take because honestly, man, if that happens, that's going to probably be the story of the first round. Like if Davidson was to knock down Duke, or second round rather, just because
this Davidson team can shoot, and they're going to bring Mark Williams and Banchero out. They're a tough team to guard. I can certainly see Davidson pulling this one out.
Okay, you heard it here first. Davidson's going to take down Duke. I'm going with Mike. Let's lock it in. All right, now we're going to look at the Gonzaga-UConn matchup. I feel like UConn could run these guys. And it's not to say that Timmy and Holmgren and their front court can't run and they don't have decent transition defense, but it's not impeccable. You know what I mean? And I feel like UConn offensively could take them down, but I feel like it would be one of those closer matchups. Maybe like an 80-75 win where it just comes down to final free throws and it's not just like a rout that maybe people would project. If you're picking between Gonzaga and UConn in a Sweet 16 matchup, which way would you end up leaning, Cutri?
So you're absolutely right. UConn can give Gonzaga a ton of problems. They have the length and physicality, and we've seen Gonzaga sort of struggle with that a little bit throughout the year when teams get a little physical with them. But for me, the difference is just the firepower. UConn offensively does not have nearly as much firepower as the Zags do, and I think that although the Zags may struggle a little bit with the physicality of UConn, their offense is just too good, and I think they pull away at the end.
Awesome. All right, let's get Gonzaga over to the Elite Eight. Now we're going to be looking at Texas Tech and Davidson. And again, very high on Texas Tech, top-end defense like you had just mentioned. I honestly think Texas Tech is probably just going to win. It'd be one of those games where they probably win handily. They might be 10-point favorites at least in this game. Do you think we could just mark in Texas Tech to go to the Elite Eight?
I think we can. Davidson will really struggle with the physicality of Texas Tech.
All right. Now, here's where I was really unsure. Again, I thought Gonzaga would at least get to the Final Four or, I mean, at least Elite Eight is kind of where I envision if you were to pick a stage of elimination bet, even though it's minus odds right now for them to even make the Final Four. I still feel like this Texas Tech team can give them some problems. I think I'm going to take Texas Tech to advance to the Final Four. Can you talk me out of it, or should we just go with Gonzaga and just go with the safe pick?
Well, it's up to you, and I don't hate it, right? The Texas Tech does have the makeup to give Gonzaga a ton of problems, and we kind of talked about this on every single matchup the Zags have in their region. That they're all not easy matchups. They have a pretty tough road to the Final Four. But for me, I am a big Gonzaga believer, and their offense is just so many notches above each one of these teams. They played Texas Tech earlier in the year. Texas Tech did give them some problems. Texas Tech was a little injured as well, and they're fully.
But I think they ran away with it in the second half, right?
Exactly. The Zags, they ran away with it in the second half. They just have too much firepower. Texas Tech doesn't really have a point guard, and in March, when games are going to be close, you need really good guard play to put the ball in their hands and make plays at the end of the game. Andrew Nembhard has it. I don't know if anybody on Texas Tech has it, so I'm going to have the Zags advance. But
we're going to have to get.
I wouldn't be mad at it.
No, I hear you, Mike. I think for me is that we got to have at least one seed making the Final Four. I mean, I know that obviously we don't want to just pick all one seeds just to do it, but I mean, the fact remains that at least one seed has made the Final Four over like 80% of the time since like the mid 80s. And the number one seed has won the tournament in 5 of the last 6 years. So I feel like we still got to have some one seeds here. All right, this is going to be a tough choice, but I feel like gun to my head, I'm going to go with you on the Zags. Let's go Zags advancing to the Final Four. All right, we're going to move on to the next region now. We're going to move on to the Eastern region. And honestly, man, you could explain this to me because I feel like it's almost like when I looked over, because essentially I really deep dove on the one seeds, and then every other seed, it was kind of just picking up as much information as I could. But I was really confused that Baylor got a one seed. Do you feel like they deserved enough to do enough to get a one seed, or was it just almost like a default, like nobody else really stood out to be that fourth best team in the country?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Baylor is that, they had a really successful season, but they ran into some bad injury luck down the stretch. Their starting center is out for the year, and then LJ Cryer, who comes off the bench, but is actually their leading scorer, is looking pretty doubtful for the tournament as well. So they have a couple things. They have a couple things going against them, but Baylor is still a really solid team. They definitely are the weakest one seed, but I have people writing them. I see people writing them off, and I don't think you should. They're still really, really solid.
Yeah, I wasn't going to predict like a UMBC Virginia thing here, where I'm going to be like, oh man, look out for Norfolk State. I think it was more along the lines of it's a really telling sign when you're not favored to get out of your group as a one seed. Right. And that like a team like Kentucky, who is the 2 seed, is favored right now. They're about plus 200 to get to the Final Four. You probably have better profit if you just rolled over each win instead of actually betting it that way. But still, it is a very telling thing that where odds makers are kind of thinking the same thing that we are, that Baylor, while they should be strong enough to maybe get to the Sweet 16 just based on who they're potentially facing here, not sure if many people are going to be making an outright bet for them to win the championship, let alone for them to win the region. I think that's a
possible leverage spot.
Absolutely. If we get to a point where it's Elite 8 or Sweet 16 and somehow it's like a 1-point favorite kind of thing, I'm going to jump all over Baylor at that point. But it's when you get into these matchups where, let's say the second round they play UNC or Marquette and they're like 20-point favorites. I'd be like, all right, that's a little excessive. Quan, you might as well just mark down now. Baylor, I think they'll still be able to outlast Norfolk State. But this first round matchup between UNC and Marquette, I don't feel like it's an easy second round matchup for Baylor, even though they had a pretty successful season. Now, I am a Tar Heels fan at heart, even though I am wearing a Kentucky hoodie. Don't get it confused. I love my Tar Heels. But obviously, this last 2 years, especially this year without Roy Williams, just not even though they didn't even make the tournament last year, but it's been a little bit of dark days for the Tar Heels, in comparison to what we were, even when we talked about that Gonzaga national championship runner-up, when they had a lot of upperclassmen and they've always been the class of being able to rebound and out-rebound teams and just be physical. UNC and Marquette. Now, if I was to default and just say I'm going to be a homer, I'm going to take UNC to take down the Golden Eagles, is that too far of a stretch for you, or do you think Marquette has a shot to be able to knock off UNC no issue?
So this is a tough one. I do think Marquette has a chance. But to me, coming into this tournament, both of these teams were definitely on my fade list. I can't trust either one of these teams because they both have been very inconsistent throughout the year, especially UNC's ball screen defense. And then Marquette, they kind of they had a period in the middle of the beginning of the year where they played really well, and then they really fell off towards the end of the year. Shaka Smart has not had success recently once he moved up to kind of high majordom.
Yeah, to Texas, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So to me, I think you can trust UNC a little bit more than Marquette, and it really comes down to Armando Bacot inside. He is just such a mismatch problem. I don't think Marquette has the size to match up with him, and he could have a monster game. I do think the guards struggle with the Marquette pressure, but I think Bacot is the difference maker, and I do have UNC narrowly pulling it out. But this is a game where I'm not going to touch betting wise.
Yeah, let's lock in the Tar Heels. You won't hear much complaint from me. Now, moving on to this next round matchup here between St. Mary's. St. Mary's for me, man, I think the one thing that immediately stood out is obviously they're one of 3 WCC teams, and obviously they have a win over Gonzaga here in this spot. You had mentioned about how the WCC conference, especially those 2 teams in San Francisco and St. Mary's, are a little bit better than people I think are giving them credit for here. As a 5 seed, do you think this is maybe a fairly easy matchup for St. Mary's?
I do. So they get either Indiana or Wyoming,
Indiana.
if I'm not mistaken, and St. Mary's matches up very well with both those teams. So either one who comes through, I'm not going to be picking them to beat St. Mary's. Not St. Mary's. Moving on.
All right, let's get a 5 seed in there, Quan. We're going to take St. Mary's here now. Last year's Final Four darling, maybe a Cinderella if you want to call them that. It's pretty difficult to consider UCLA, just given their program history, a Cinderella. But I guess that's what they were considered last year, just basically because they were one of those play-in teams that made it to the Final Four. So UCLA got a nice little first-round matchup with Akron. I think UCLA is winning this game. In fact, I think maybe I don't want to say that we're sleeping on UCLA, but I would definitely think that I just feel like that they're probably going to go a little bit further than maybe we're giving them credit for. Do I think they're going to Final Four run in them? I'm not 100% certain, but I just look at this bracket and a region rather, and I feel like they got a fairly easy draw to maybe potentially make it again. So would you be kind of the guy who would say, man, don't forget about Akron if I was to lock in UCLA right now?
I am going to be that person.
All right, let's hear it.
So UCLA had that magical run as the 11 seed playing game last year. They got super hot shooting the ball during the tournament, made the Final Four. And then they came into the season a little overrated in a lot of people's minds.
Like number 2 ranked,
which typically happens when you make they have everybody coming back, you make a run in March, but definitely a little overrated. They're probably more around like the 10th best team in the country. So this 4 seed kind of seems about right. Super talented team. Love Mick Cronin. They have a great point guard. They have shot makers on the wings. Don't take the greatest shots, but you need that kind of scoring ability in a tournament setting. But we're going to look here at Akron, who is from the MAC, and the MAC historically over the last few years has had success in the tournament. You look at Ohio, who won a game last year. And they're really, really solid. They're playing their best basketball of the season down the stretch. They have the size on the wings. They have a guy named Ali, who's their best player. He can match up with Jaime Jaquez. They have a big man who's their best player who can kind of cause some problems underneath, Enrique. But what Akron's going to try to do is they're going to really slow this game down. They're going to try to keep it out of transition, keep it very, very half-court centric. I'm looking at the line. It's 14.5 now. I'm all over Akron. I think they can keep this pretty close. All they have to do is hit enough shots. And their backcourt has been playing much better down the stretch. Am I going to pick Akron to upset UCLA? I don't think so. I think I like the upsets on the other regions much more than here. But from a betting perspective, I'm going to be all over Akron to keep this one close.
I like that. All right. So, Quan, let's just put UCLA in just as a token. But right now, I'm feeling a little doubtful about their chances here. However, one thing I'm not feeling doubtful for, and I know that obviously we can look at Virginia Tech and talk about, oh, what a late magical run, like to win the ACC tournament. But for me, this feels more like a fade of Texas, of why I'm taking Virginia Tech more so than taking Virginia Tech, because I feel confident in them. Texas to me has just been like that perennial just disappointment. Like, all the time that they had with Shaka. And then, like one of the things, like I remember, like I was really hyped up about Greg Brown last year. Just thought, I was like, you know what, man, he's going to be a difference maker. His athleticism. And he just looked like he just didn't know how to play basketball all the time. Like he just, he could do a lot of awesome things on the court. But when it came down to it, they just weren't very cohesive as a unit. And obviously they lost in the first round as a 2 seed last year to Abilene Christian. So here I am now pondering if whether or not Virginia Tech's run was legit, or am I just too much of a sourpuss about Texas because I lost my Texas outright bet last year?
No, you're definitely on the right track here, and these are all things to definitely consider. I mean, coming into the year, I was one of the biggest Texas backers, just because I still think they probably top to bottom are one of the more talented teams in the entire country. But, the game of basketball just isn't strictly about talent. You need chemistry, you need cohesion, you need everything to kind of line up in the way you play. And it just hasn't worked out for Texas, especially on the offensive end. If I look at this matchup just from a matchup perspective, Texas does have the matchup advantage here. Mm-hmm. Where Texas kind of struggles is, kind of against pressure defense, and they can kind of get worked inside against more physical teams, which you've seen that happen in the Big 12 since they're such a physical conference. Virginia Tech doesn't really play like that. They play more of a finesse. Their big guys like to step out. But what this game really is a story of is teams trending in way different directions. Texas losing 3 straight to end the season. Vatex playing the best basketball of their season.
Just because of that, I'm not really like a momentum guy. Like I don't really like banking on that, because if you did, you were the guy. Though. Well, but you were the guy who bet on Georgetown last year in the first round, and then they got beat by like 20 points by Colorado. Like, you know what I mean?
That's true.
You remember how they went on that run last year. But still, obviously, we just have to still look at this just as an individual matchup. I'm going to go with the hot hand right now with Virginia Tech, but I will be kind of keeping in mind of whether or not I may change this later on. But right now, I'm just going to go with Tech. Going to go with the Hokies to advance over the Longhorns, even though I don't think Virginia Tech will have a long run into the tourney. But let's look at Mike, at Purdue and Yale. And Purdue, that was one of the teams that you had brought up that doesn't have a point guard, or at least what you feel is strong guard play to be a lead ball handler. Obviously, they have an elite talent of shot maker in Jaden Ivey, but they're playing an Ivy League team, coincidentally, in Yale. And that's, for me, when I immediately look at this, I'm like, you know what? I just don't know if you always kind of look at these Ivy League teams and you just wonder if they have just enough talent. Like, obviously, they can play as a team. They likely have more upperclassmen coming from that conference. But at the same time, when you look at a team like Purdue, just of how well they played throughout the year, the type of competition they've played, I just don't think that point guard issue is going to be enough of an issue for this matchup. So would you be okay with me putting Purdue advancing to the second round to play Virginia Tech, or do you think Yale is going to give them a problem?
No, so absolutely you can move Purdue in the next round. Purdue is definitely a upset candidate just because of their very poor defense. But this Yale team is extremely lucky to be into the tournament. They if in the championship game of the Ivy Conference Finals, they had a massive ceiling performance. We're hitting contested shots from everywhere. I think shot quality had them losing that game by 15 points. And it's such a shame because Princeton is talented enough, if they came out of the Ivy League, to actually make some noise in this tournament.
Right.
I don't think Yale can. They have an shooting guard, Azar Swain, who's very good, but outside of that, they can't really score. They're going to get overwhelmed by the Purdue size. It's just a really bad matchup for Yale here. So we're going to
love it. All right, Boilermakers moving on. They're going to be playing Virginia Tech in the next round by my bracket. Murray State and San Francisco. Murray State getting a lot of buzz here in this matchup. Now, looking at San Francisco, obviously coming out of the WCC with Gonzaga. I didn't really do a ton of research on these two teams because honestly, like just Murray State, I mean, we know about them just from a mid-major standpoint, but San Francisco, they hadn't made the tournament in a long time. I'm just not really sure which side to go with here. So if you had to sum it up in 30 seconds, which side are we taking here on this game? Who do you got?
I'll try to keep it 30 seconds here. So this one's razor thin, right? This one can go either way. The biggest storyline here is the health of San Francisco's center, Uren Masowski. He has a shoulder injury. Murray State has a very, very talented big man in KJ Williams who can cause a lot of problems if San Francisco's starting center is out. If he's healthy, I do think it comes down to the backcourt play, which both of these teams have very solid backcourts. But I tend to lean towards San Francisco's backcourt just a smidge behind Bouye and Shabazz. They are super quick, lightning in transition. I think they have a little more experience than Murray State backcourt. So I would go, if Masowski plays, I'm going to be leaning towards San Francisco. If he's out, I'll take Murray State.
Right. Yeah. See, that's what's tough now because I got to make a pick now. Honestly, I'm going to bank on him playing just because the fact like it's probably the only time he's ever going to get to play in the tournament. And not only that, I like the idea of 3 WCC teams advancing in the first round.
I do too.
So
against
we're
the
going to
grain.
talk. Yeah. So why don't we just, I mean, it's not that I have anything against Kentucky's opponent. I'm just pretty high on the Wildcats. I think they're going to at least make the second round. Before we keep going, though, we might as well just look at Baylor and UNC because this is where I think I feel like it's going to be a closer game, but UNC's three-point shooting has been an issue for a couple of years now. I'm just not sure that they're going to be able to do enough to overcome Baylor in this spot. I'm fairly certain they played last year in the tournament, or not last year, but 2 years ago in the tournament. But so for me, I'm going to take Baylor to get to the Sweet 16, and then we're going to start picking them apart a little bit more about who they potentially play. But St. Mary's and UCLA, I think this is a matchup that I need your help with because the casual in me thinks UCLA should be able to take down this team no problem. But St. Mary's pretty tough team and a team that, just a program that has been consistently playing well. That, it's not like this is their first tournament appearance. Where do you lean here if you were looking at a St. Mary's UCLA matchup? Do you think St. Mary's could win this game outright?
They can absolutely win this game outright. I'm still on the fence on who I want coming out of this game. I still have a day, so I'm still kind of analyzing it. But yeah, St. Mary's super solid. They got mobile bigs that can step out and hit threes. They get back in transition. They ball screen you to death on offense. Right now, I'm leaning the UCLA side just because they have a few more shot makers, and I do really love Mick Cronin as a coach in the tournament setting. So I'm going to move UCLA on for now.
So if we move UCLA here and they potentially play Baylor in the next matchup, and we're talking about how Baylor, there's still a potential here that UCLA can make the Elite Eight, at this stage, just based on how we're thinking, which is crazy. So, all right, UCLA, Quan, let's lock them in to go to the Sweet 16. Virginia Tech and Purdue. Now, this is the one where it's the unstoppable force and immovable object kind of scenario here, because obviously when you think of Purdue, you just think of those massive dunk highlights and three-point shots of Jaden Ivey. But Virginia Tech has just been playing so well over the last 2 to 3 weeks, really. But I still think the Boilermakers could squeeze this out. I think they get to the Sweet 16. Do you think Virginia Tech's run ends in the second round?
So if Purdue does get a second round matchup with Virginia Tech, I think it's a very bad matchup for Purdue. And strictly just because of the versatility of Virginia Tech's bigs, right? Justin Mutz, Keve Aluma, step out, hit threes. They're going to do a lot of pick and pop against, those big Purdue centers who are terrible at ball screen defense. Plus they're shooting the ball very well at the moment. I think this is a spot where Purdue's 100th ranked defense nationally per KenPom catches up to them, and Virginia Tech can certainly take advantage of it.
Ooh, all right. Virginia Tech on a little Sweet 16 run. Interesting. All right. And I mean, Purdue is the type of team where I guarantee they're going to have a lot of handle at sportsbooks of people thinking that they're either going to make the Final Four or win it all, just because of how talented Jaden Ivey is and just overall playing in a fairly strong conference in the Big Ten. But it would not shock me to see an upset where they fall early. I'm going to go ahead and just say Kentucky beats San Francisco. I know, and even if they weren't to beat San Francisco, I think they could still beat Murray State.
You got the sweatshirt on, so we'll go with them.
Yeah. I mean, we don't really have to go much deeper than that. All right, now Baylor UCLA. Based on just kind of what we've been talking about and just researching more into Baylor, if this was the hypothetical matchup in the Sweet 16, I still think UCLA can win this game. So I'm going to put UCLA into the Elite Eight. Why would I not put UCLA into that spot based on what we know about Baylor?
So UCLA can certainly win this matchup. UCLA is healthy at the right time. They dealt with some injuries down the stretch, but everybody seems to be back. The only thing where I would still look into this, and just from a more kind of game theory, bracket filling out kind of theory, is that if I see enough people, so like I'll pull up ESPN's kind of percentages on how many people are picking who,
yes, fade the
and
public.
if a lot of people don't have Baylor in the Elite Eight, I mean, Baylor's going to be favored in this game. So that's when I would choose Baylor. Matchup wise, it's really tough. It's right down the line. I mean, UCLA has enough playmakers on offense and athletic wings to kind of get in the lane against that no middle defense, which you need against that kind of defense Baylor runs. But also, Baylor's a little underrated in my opinion. They have length everywhere. They're super switchable. Everybody can guard those wings. And point guard play, James Akinjo versus Tiger Campbell is going to be fire. So this one can go either way. I don't mind putting UCLA here, but to me, this is going to be a fade the public type of move when I end up filling my bracket out tomorrow.
Absolutely. All right, so we got UCLA going to the Elite Eight. Virginia Tech is going to be playing Kentucky. Again, I'm going to pull the homer card here. I still think Kentucky could win this game just based on matchup with their backcourt and just being from a rebounding presence with Oscar. I still think that they can. I mean, I'm not going to say that Kentucky's winning at all. I'm not going that far. But I just think that they're going to be able to beat Virginia Tech if this was the hypothetical matchup in the Sweet 16. Mike, am I wrong in thinking that? Or should I just seems? And it's probably the most I've ever talked about the Hokies in my life. But at the same time, they've been on a nice run. But I just think Kentucky's going to win this game. Do you disagree?
No, I'm definitely on board with that.
Right.
Coach Cal always has Kentucky playing their best basketball towards the end of the year. They did have a floor performance in the SEC semifinal game, but I don't think that's indicative of the talent of this team. They're legit, and I have them moving on too.
Beauty. Now, with Kentucky in this main matchup, though, this is where it's like, okay, do I go with my allegiance per se, or do I go with a matchup per se? And for me, still looking at if it was a hypothetical matchup between UCLA and Kentucky, I kind of like Kentucky in this matchup. I'm trying not to be a homer, man, and I really like. You can call me that if you want. You can say, "Man, what the hell are you talking about?" Blah 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 blah. I just think that UCLA, maybe this is kind of the end of the road, which would still be a very commendable run to get back to the Elite Eight. But I just think Kentucky is going to get to the Final Four out of this bracket. Tell me why I'm wrong, or tell me why UCLA is winning this game.
I don't think you're wrong. I'm on the Kentucky train too. I kind of, since maybe mid-season where they kind of turned a little bit of a corner, I've kind of been on the Kentucky train as well. I think Big O is a game changer if he can stay out of foul trouble. I think he does in a matchup against UCLA. And I think UCLA's kind of poor shot selection catches up to them at some point, and this could be the matchup.
Beauty. All right, now Kentucky going to the Final Four. So we've got Gonzaga and Kentucky into the Final Four through the first two regions. Juan, let's move on to the South. And the South, very popular team to win it all. They're getting a lot of bets at sports books. Guys like, experts like Seth Davis are picking Arizona to win it all out of this region. We're going to go ahead and put Arizona getting to the second round at this stage. But Seton Hall and TCU, Pirates and Horned Frogs here. This is one of those matchups where I just didn't know enough about the teams to make a solid pick, especially with it being so close from an 8-9 standpoint. I'm leaning to the Pirates right now, but tell me if I'm off base and we should be looking at TCU.
No, so this is a coin flip, right? It reminds me of the Boise-Memphis kind of matchup. So both these teams' makeup are pretty similar, whereas they're both very long, lengthy, good interior defenses. It probably should be more on the low-scoring side of it. The thing that's a difference maker to me, and I know Seton Hall pretty well. I live right down 5 minutes away from where they play, so I go to a ton of their games. They're a New Jersey team, obviously, so I might be a little biased, but Seton Hall's starting point guard and arguably their best offensive player, it has been out with a concussion for a long time and probably is not coming back for the tournament. So they're down their starting point guard. And TCU does have a very good combo guard in Mike Miles that if the game is close, I trust him way more than the Seton Hall backcourt. TCU does have a little bit of red flags on offense. They rank 336th in turnover percentage. They get a lot of their points from offensive rebounding. They're the second best offensive rebounding team in the country, and Seton Hall cleans the glass pretty well. But I think without Bryce Aiken on the Seton Hall side and Mike Miles kind of handling point guard duties for TCU, if it's going to be a close game, I'm going to side with TCU.
TCU it is. Horned Frogs. I love it. Now, Houston made the Final Four last year, playing University of Alabama, Birmingham in this matchup. We so Chris Meany, he hosts Mean Streets as well on FTN Network. He had Frank Brank on the show, and he actually likes Houston to get out of this region. I wanted to hear a little bit more. You can go watch the show if you want to hear his full analysis, but I think by that logic, I feel pretty good about them taking down UAB. Do you disagree?
I do. I do disagree.
All right, let's hear it.
So the metrics love Houston, and I totally get that, right? So according to Ken Palm and a lot of the metric sites, I think, I have it up here. They're 4th nationally in the metrics, Houston. To me, if you didn't take Houston last year, I think you kind of missed the boat on them. And I was huge. I was huge on Houston last year. It worked out for me. I had them in the Final Four. It worked out really well. This year's Houston team is very, very good. They lost 2 of their best players from last year. They're 2 kind of combo guards in Giroux and Grimes. This year, they lost their 2 best guards again, where they went down with injury. So Marcus Sasser was their 3rd best guard last year, best guard this year. He went down with injury. He's done for the season. And then their 2nd best guard, Tremaine Mark, who's probably their best or 2nd best overall scorer, he also went down with an injury. So they're kind of pretty thin this year. And if you look at the American, right, Houston kind of ran through the American, but the American was not as good as it was last year. Houston didn't have the greatest out-of-conference schedule. They are underseeded here, but, I think they're a little bit of smoke and mirrors. Their best big man, Fabian White, kind of in the semifinals of the conference tournament game, went out with a back injury. He came back for the finals. He looked okay, but who knows if that's going to flare up again. Yeah. I'm a little worried about this Houston team. I mean, the thing with Houston is they kick you in the mouth, right? They're super physical. They get on the glass. If you can't be physical and you're not up for a fight and you're more of a finesse team, Houston's going to destroy you. Though I don't care how thin they are in their roster. UAB, on the other hand,
that's what I want to know.
They're really feisty. They pressure the ball a lot. They have playmaking guards on the offensive side. They have Jelly Walker as their point guard, who can make plays. They're not going to back down to this Houston team. They have a lot of high major Division I transfers down that is on this UAB now. KJ Buffin's one of them. He's a physical guy inside. And then the last thing to mention about UAB is that they are the 9th best 3-point shooting team in the country. And to beat Houston in that pack line defense where they kind of don't allow anything at the rim, you're going to have to hit threes. UAB can do that. It's really hard for me to pick UAB here because of how physical and tough of a matchup Houston is. But if I'm going to take a shot, I think this is where I'm going to do it. And I don't think a lot of people are going the same way. So I'm going to pick UAB.
12-5 upset, man. It happens every year, it feels like. So, yeah, let's go UAB. Now, Illinois, obviously last year was a bit of a disappointment with just kind of how that went. But we're able to get a 4 seed after being a 1 seed last year. I kind of like Illinois to take down Chattanooga. I wasn't really going to try to make too much of a case about why I thought Chattanooga was going to be able to overcome them. However, you may feel differently, but I'm still probably going to take Illinois to advance on this spot. Do you feel like Chattanooga is going to maybe pull off a possible upset here in the 4-13 matchup?
No, so I actually love Illinois this year, and I think they're the best team that coming out of the Big Ten, out of everybody in that conference.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This matchup here with Chattanooga, it's a very poor matchup. I love this Chattanooga team. They're very talented, but it's a poor matchup. They don't have anybody who can stop Kofi down low. They have a Kansas transfer, Silvio De Sousa. I can't even talk right now. As their big man, but he's more of like a 4 kind of. He doesn't have the size or the length to kind of stop Kofi. If you look at their KenPom metrics, they are not a good interior defense type of team. So I think Kofi kind of has a field day against this team. Malachi Smith is a very talented point guard, but he's going to have Trent Frazier following him around all game, who's one of the best defenders in the country. It just doesn't really line up. I have a bet on Illinois -6.5. I think it's up to 7.5 now. I think they advance here pretty easily, and I'm hoping to get some leverage with Illinois because a lot of people have that bad taste in their mouth from last year when they lost the 1 seed.
Me being one of them.
which I had Loyola beating them, so it worked out for me great last year. So I'm kind of taking the other side, and I think they're going to have a little bit of success in the tournament this year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people look at AO leaving and now watching him hoop with the Bulls that he was a huge loss, and not to say that he wasn't. He was up for National Player of the Year. He was really good,
great player.
But they still had a lot of guard depth. So Illinois, let's have them advance. This is the matchup that I really wanted to talk to you about from this region, and this is Colorado State and Michigan. And the reason why I wanted to talk about Michigan specifically with you is just because ever since that slap heard around the world, that kind of happened, it's just been, it was already kind of going downhill for them, but the bottom just looks like it completely fell out for the Wolverines. And coming into the season, bringing back Hunter Dickinson, and, I follow a lot of Canadian hoops. So like, Caleb Houston coming into the program, he was highly touted coming out of the Canadian program. So I was like, oh man, he's a McDonald's All-American. This should be great. We're going to be able to get more depth for potentially the national team. And he has not looked good just in the games and the clips that I've watched of him this year. But it's really difficult for me to think about Colorado State taking down the Wolverines here. But I guess what I'm getting at is I have two conclusions: that Colorado State just won't have enough firepower to take down Michigan, but Michigan is just such a mess that I can't trust them to beat anybody, let alone Colorado State. Where right now, I don't really feel like it's a huge upset to take Michigan in this spot, but I also don't feel like it's a huge I feel like it's more of a coin flip than anything. So please help me decide between these two teams. Am I taking the Wolverines here, or are we taking Colorado State?
Yeah, so it's a tough one. And I actually think Michigan is 2.5 point favorites now. So they wouldn't really be an upset from a gambling perspective. Does Colorado State have the firepower to beat this Michigan team? Absolutely. They are a juggernaut on offense. They have probably one of the more fun players to watch in David Roddy, who is like a 6'9" kind of bull that can step out and hit threes. I think both teams in this matchup are going to have a ton of trouble guarding each other. I have a play on the over. It's at 139.5 now. I think it's a great bet. On the side-wise, it's tough. But just because I think Michigan may have a few more pieces that can score, Hunter Dickinson is a matchup problem for Colorado State. Like I mentioned, Roddy is like 6'9". He's their tallest player. I think they're going to have to try to double team him. And he's a pretty good passer out of the post. I think he finds enough. You mentioned Caleb Houston not having a great year, but he's a very good spot-up shooter. He just hasn't been, the 15, 16 point per game player that Wolverines fan thought he was going to be. He's more of just a role player at this point. But, Devontae Jones has been stepping up. Eli Brooks can score when he kind of gets aggressive. I think Michigan has a little more pieces around their studs than Colorado State does. So I'm going to have Michigan move on.
Let's take Michigan then. I think what just really shocked me about the Wolverines was that I'm not saying that Franz Wagner isn't a great player. He's really good with Orlando this year, or Isaiah Livers. I just didn't think that those two losses and then bringing Caleb Houston in, I just didn't think it was going to be that much of a drop off where they were a 1 seed last year and now couldn't even get out of their own way. You know what I mean? Before the conclusion of the Big Ten season.
No, absolutely. And they also lost Mike Smith as their starting point guard, which a lot of people, weren't really thinking about because his numbers aren't that great. But he was a super important piece and a great playmaker for this team. So
and you need that kind of floor general in this tournament, right? So
exactly.
Now Tennessee and Longwood. We're going to talk about Tennessee a little bit. I think more in the second round matchup because I think Tennessee is not to say that they didn't deserve a 3 seed, but I thought. With winning the SEC, I thought they would be a little bit higher up in from a seeding standpoint. But at the same time, I still feel like Tennessee, I don't really need to do too much research into Longwood to feel like I think Tennessee is going to win this game. Can we move Tennessee on, or do you think we need to talk a little bit more about Longwood?
We definitely can, but I do want to mention that Longwood could give Tennessee a little bit of problems. And from a betting perspective, I think it's 15.5. Yes. I'm on the Longwood side. They can spread you out. They shoot a ton of threes. They're really good on offense. And I think that can give Tennessee a little bit of problems and make it a little bit competitive, but by no means do I think they're going to beat Tennessee.
Now, the next team, obviously, that you benefited from last year until they kind of fell on their face, but it was still amazing to watch another little run by Sister Jean and Loyola Chicago playing Ohio State in the first round. Ohio State, for me, from a basketball perspective, has just been so disappointing just over the last few years. And it looks to be a little bit more of the same, just looking at their track record and resume this season. I don't really feel like taking Loyola Chicago is like a trendy pick like a bad, like almost like fading the public, like that a lot of people are going to be probably fading the Buckeyes in this spot just because of Loyola's history over the last 3 to 4 seasons. Do you think Loyola Chicago, maybe they might not go on another run, but do you think they'll be pretty much in the mix to be able to take down the Buckeyes in this matchup?
Absolutely. This Loyola team, they bring back everybody except their starting center, Krutwig. And they also lost their coach, but they have one of the bright young stars in Drew Valentine at the helm. He's done a fantastic job with this Loyola team this year. For context, he is the younger brother, or maybe older brother, of Denzel Valentine, who I don't follow the NBA.
I would say younger brother then, because Denzel was playing in the NBA for a while.
Yeah. But he's their coach. He's Loyola's coach, and he's the youngest coach in Division I. I think he's their older brother, but semantics doesn't really matter, but he's Denzel Valentine's brother. Done a fantastic job with Loyola this year, taking over for Moser. Kept their defensive intensity and actually changed their offense a little bit to be more NBA centric, a little more spacing. They run a little more pick and roll. Problem with Ohio State is they're very banged up. They got 3 guys that are on the pine right now. Most importantly, Kyle Young, who a lot of people who follow Ohio State are like, why are you talking about Kyle Young? He doesn't really score, but he is their most important player by far. He's the definition of a glue guy. Not having him is very important for this Ohio State team. But the metric to look at is their defense, right? So they are ranked 131st defensively nationally in the entire country for a Power 5 school. That is pretty terrible. Their ball screen defense has been really bad. Loyola runs a ton of ball screen pick and roll, and they actually grade out in the 94th percentile in pick and roll offense. It's just a really good matchup for Loyola, and I'll have them moving on. So
let's put Sister Jean at least going to the second round. I don't want to go too much into the Blue Hens. I think Villanova takes them down fairly easily. But if we're looking right now at Arizona and TCU, same thing. I kind of feel like Arizona right now, just offensively and defensively, they're just a class above right now, a team like the Horned Frogs. Should we move Arizona over to the Sweet 16 at this stage?
Arizona's legit. Let's move them on.
Yeah. All right. Now, Illinois and UAB. Now, you talked about how well UAB could shoot and, how they might be able to potentially spread out Houston. Could that be the case against an Illinois team that, is probably a pretty good team in the half court, but I think they excel offensively in transition as well. I kind of think the Illini are going to get to the Sweet 16. Am I off base here thinking that they can take down UAB?
I do too. And I think the difference maker for Illinois this year is how locked in Andre Curbelo is. He's been injured the whole season, but finally getting healthy towards the end. And he is a bona fide maestro with the ball. He turns the ball over a little too much for a lot of people's liking, but he does have a over 33% assist rate. When he's on, Illinois is playing their best, and the pressure defense of UAB, Illinois has a good enough backcourt to kind of alleviate that pressure and get easy buckets against them. I think they move on.
So the next question I was going to ask is, before we go down on this one, I just want to talk about Arizona and Illinois' potential matchup, because the point guard issue right now with Arizona, with their starting point guard being injured, I'm not sure about the severity of it, but it sounds like he's probably going to miss at least one game just from the tournament. So with this being the second week and the fact that, he could potentially be back by this point playing in Illinois, I feel like that's going to be a little bit more of an edge for them. Like, I'm not really sure that they're going to need him against, this potential playing game against the 16 seed, and then potentially against TCU or Seton Hall. Whereas when you get into these little more rumble tumble matchups like Illinois or potentially Michigan or Tennessee, that starting point guard is going to be a big difference. I think, just based on the reports that I've read, is that he is only probably going to miss at most the opening weekend. But how do you feel about taking Arizona to get to the Elite Eight over Illinois?
I am leaning Arizona in this matchup. They actually met earlier in the season in Champaign, and Arizona was able to win on the road. And the reason is because Illinois' strength, obviously, is their absolute monster in the paint, Kofi Cockburn. What Arizona is very good at is defending the rim. and they do have a ton of size to throw at him.
Mm-hmm.
He actually had a very poor game when they met earlier in the season. I think that can happen again. Obviously, there's definitely point guard concerns for Arizona with Kirk Krisa on the mend. He tweeted out a picture of his foot this morning, and it did not look good. His whole foot is purple. So at the earliest, I do think he potentially could come back in the Sweet 16. Is it a significant loss? Yes, on offense. But I was looking more into the metrics it's a small sample size. I think he's been out for 2 games now. But their defense seems to be playing a little bit better with Kyer running the show rather than Krisa. So you lose a little bit on offense, but maybe you gain on defense. I don't think it's the hugest deal until they run into a Tennessee or Villanova team in the Elite Eight. But for this matchup, I think that they neutralize Coburn enough to move on.
All right, so let's go to Arizona. They're getting to the Elite Eight. All right, well, let's move on now, Quan, down to Michigan and Tennessee. This is one, again, where I feel like Tennessee, like right now, just if you were to ask me, gun to my head, who do you think's winning? I'm going Tennessee. Michigan's a dumpster fire. They're a mess right now. But this feels like almost like an FU type of run that could happen with Michigan where, all of a sudden they're just completely counted out. And it's like, wow, Wolverines are the Elite Eight. Like, how did that happen? So I'm leaning to Tennessee here. But do you think maybe that we could be looking at a possibility of a nice little run here by the Wolverines?
When you talk about possibilities in college basketball, the possibilities are endless. So can it happen? Absolutely. We've seen crazier stuff happen. Yeah. We've seen crazier stuff happen. I am a very big backer of this Tennessee team. They're playing their best basketball this season right now. They've always been very stout defensively, but this is the best Tennessee offense I've seen in a couple of years from them. Better floor spacing. They have dual point guards with Ziegler kind of coming into the scene. I think it's just too much for Michigan, so I have Tennessee moving on.
Let's move the Volunteers over to the Elite Eight. Now, Villanova and Loyola Chicago. I know that we are obviously happy to see Loyola back in the tournament. I'm just really high on this Villanova team. Although even earlier in the season of the out-of-conference schedule, I've seen some losses that they've had where I was like, oh, that's a little iffy. But then just watching how they played through the Big East, and it just reminded me of like every Jay Wright team that I'm used to watching over the last few seasons. And usually those teams go pretty deep into the tournament. So I'm feeling confident that Villanova is going to get to the Elite Eight. Am I wrong in thinking that?
No, you're absolutely right. And, Loyola is a very good team. They're locked in defensively. But what they do is they out-execute teams. They're not going to out-execute Villanova. It's just a bad matchup there. Like Jay Wright and that Villanova veteran backcourt, you're not going to out-execute them. And that's the kind of game style it kind of ends up being, which I think it will be. I have to side with Villanova there.
Awesome. And before we do, just from Villanova's status standpoint, how has Colin Gillespie looked this season coming off of that injury? Has he been struggling? Has he been a focal point of the offense? I have a pretty good pulse of where their offense is, like just from a talent standpoint, but I haven't been able to watch a lot of it's mostly highlights. So I don't see like his body language throughout the game or whatever else. How has he looked this season? Is it something that will be an issue for Villanova going forward?
No, he's looked pretty good. He actually did get dinged up a couple times this year, but you gave me the green light to curse. So I'm going to tell you that guy is tough as shit. And that's kind of the only way you can kind of talk about it is that if he's hurt, you don't notice it. He still plays unbelievably well. So that's really nothing to worry about with Colin Gillespie. He is a bona fide tough guy.
Well, then with the Villanova-Tennessee matchup then, because obviously you're fairly high on Tennessee, but Villanova, it's difficult to want to fade them just based on their coaching and the roster and the pedigree. I have to see what obviously the spread and total is before I feel fully confident in making a pick. But at the same time, if you just ask me just one-on-one who's winning, I think Villanova wins this game. Tell me I'm wrong.
So this is something right now I have circled on my bracket. I want to take Tennessee really bad, but I don't know if it's the greatest matchup for them. And you talk about coaching, and Rick Barnes historically has not had a good track record in the tournament. The best example is that this guy had Kevin Durant and didn't get out of the first weekend. So that kind of tells you something.
Second round. Yeah.
that kind of tells you something. where Jay Wright is a top 3 coach in the nation easily. These two teams actually did meet earlier in the season, and Villanova blitzed them pretty well from start to finish. I don't know if it's the greatest matchup for Tennessee. That said, Tennessee is a much different team now than they were in the beginning of the season. Their point guards are both freshmen that have done a ton of growing up. Ziegler is playing way more minutes than he did in the beginning. Their best player and kind of leader is Josiah Jordan-James, who was kind of dinged up in the beginning of the year. He's fully healthy now. He looks really good. So just because of Tennessee's recent form, I have them penciled in to win this game now. But I'm going to go back and watch that game. I have it circled on my bracket. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But for now, I'm going to move Tennessee on.
Yeah, and I was going to say it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like I feel like both of us, even just on a casual observation, if I was to be like, I think Villanova could beat Tennessee, like you would just be like, yeah, that could happen. Like, you know what I mean? It's not really that crazy of an outcome. Since it's my bracket, even though just keep in mind, Cutri thinks Tennessee is going to take down Villanova if this was a hypothetical matchup. I'm going to go with Villanova just in this circumstance. One time, I get probably two overrules throughout the year.
Hey, this is your world.
Yeah, so if that is the case, awesome regional matchup between Arizona and Villanova here to close out this region. I still feel like Arizona is the better team, but based on what we've talked about and just like, again, pedigree on both teams, not to say that Arizona doesn't have pedigree, but it is obviously a different coaching regime comparatively to what we saw, when they were actually getting high-end recruits and whatever else. I still think that Arizona is going to win this game, but it's just going to be by like a hair. Do you think we can put Arizona into the Final Four, and would you feel that this is a detrimental mistake by me?
Well, so here's my dilemma here. So if I think Tennessee makes it to the Elite Eight, I think they match up with Arizona very well. Maybe the best out of anybody in this tournament, right? They can neutralize the Arizona front court with their size, their stout interior defense, and their explosive guard play might be even a little better than Arizona's. They played earlier in the year. The game ended up being close, but Tennessee controlled it from start to finish. So if Tennessee comes out, I'm going to have them moving to the Final Four. But if you have Villanova here, I think Arizona matches up very well with Villanova. They are going to, kind of overwhelm them with their size inside. I don't think Nova has an answer for Coloco or Tubelis inside. And the transition game is just going to wear on them the entire game where Nova can't keep up with them. I would have Arizona moving on.
All right, so then here's the strategy then. If you have Tennessee facing Arizona in the Elite Eight, have a look at Tennessee in this spot. If you have Arizona playing Villanova in the Elite Eight, let's have Arizona to advance. So we're going to put Arizona making it to the Final Four. All right, we're on the last region now. Midwest, Kansas, Jayhawks, number 1 seed. Let's just have them advance. I highly doubt either of those teams will give them too much of a challenge. But this next game of San Diego State and Creighton, I find it to be really interesting. Just a big, almost like contrast of styles. I personally think that San Diego State is going to win this game, but Creighton, just the way that they have looked, just recent form, because I've watched mostly what they were playing in the Big East tournament. Offensively, they could still do some things, and I'm just a little worried about whether or not that defense might not be good enough. How do you feel about this game, and do you think that it could be a San Diego State Aztec kind of moving on here, or are you thinking the Blue Jays take this game?
So I just first want to point out that the job Doug McDermott did with Creighton this year has been unbelievable. Like he should be considered a national coach of the year. They've had extreme roster turnover. They're playing mostly freshmen, and to make the run in the Big East and make the tournament like they did, it's kind of unbelievable. The thing with this game is that it's going to be a dogfight. Creighton's defense is actually very, very good, especially at protecting the rim. So is San Diego State's. They, I think, are, I have it written down here, second nationally, I think, or second nationally ranked in defense efficiency per KenPom. So this is going to be a grind. The difference, in my opinion, in this game is that Creighton does turn the ball over a lot, and they are missing their starting point guard, Ryan Nembhard. Andrew Nembhard's younger brother is a freshman point guard for them, but he is out with a wrist injury. He's not going to be playing in this game. I think that spells trouble against a really solid defensive team. This game is going to be probably in the high 50s, low 60s possessions. but I think San Diego State pulls it out.
So let's go Aztecs moving on here. And now Iowa and Richmond. Iowa, very trendy pick, obviously, to make some noise in this region. And, they, from an NBA standpoint, they have a very highly touted lottery pick potentially. And I believe it's Keegan Murray, who is just, when I looked at his splits just like a year over year, like I couldn't believe that they had like the National Player of the Year on this team. He averaged, I don't know, maybe 7 points per game. Like obviously he was playing half the amount of time, but then you look at his stats and he's averaging over 20 points per game. So obviously it was a little bit of opportunity to be able to move on and get better, obviously. But for me, the first thing I think to myself is, why are we even considering Richmond? I feel like Iowa would just shoot the lights out on them. Can we move Iowa on, or do you think we should have a little bit more of a discussion about Richmond?
Okay, so this is a very interesting spot when filling out your brackets. And I only say that is because, like you said, Iowa is a very trendy pick. I see a lot of people have them in the Final Four. So when you talk about leverage, right, this to me is the primary leverage spot in the entire bracket.
So if you're doing a bracket contest with us, you want to be considering Richmond because majority of the public is probably going to be taking Iowa State to
and
go
having them
deep.
going far, them going far. Exactly. And, you always, you see these people on Friday or on Saturday and you talk to them about their bracket and they're like, oh, my bracket's done because so-and-so lost so early. Right. I have a feeling that it's going to be Iowa for a lot of people this year. I mean, Iowa's one of the hottest teams in the country. Like you mentioned, Keegan Murray is an absolute machine. Nightmare matchup for anybody. But this Richmond team is no joke. I mean, they kind of struggled a little bit during the season, but they have a very veteran squad. They remind me a lot of Davidson. They run a Princeton-style offense, a lot of backdoor cuts. If you're not disciplined and can guard them for a full 30 seconds, they're going to kind of tear you up. Jacob Gilliard is a fantastic point guard for them. A veteran point guard, been playing for them and leading the team forever. Very well coached. Iowa's defense does have some holes in it. I think they're ranked in the 70s in defensive efficiency. Has been better lately, which has kind of led to their hot run. But, how much do you trust Fran McCaffrey in a tournament setting? He hasn't had that much success in the tournament historically. So if everybody's going to put all their marbles into one basket and back Iowa, I'm going to go on the side to take the opposite and have a ton of leverage. And I will lose in the first round, and I'm looking golden to win my bracket. So I'm moving Richmond on.
Down goes the Hawkeyes. Let's get Richmond in here. Now, another popular underdog pick is a lot of people talking about how Providence, they had some good showings this year, but I've seen a lot of buzz about South Dakota State so far. I'm not sure if I'm fully on board with that, but at the same time, this is why we do this show. We want to hear more about this. Right now, the line is probably around Providence -1.5, like maybe -2, depending on the sports book. I'm going to take Providence to move on here, but why should we be looking at South Dakota State if this is the case with that betting spread?
Yeah, so this is another very interesting one where South Dakota State is certainly a trendy upset pick, right? And you see a lot of people. I pick them. I am going to monitor this one as far as looking at ESPN's percentage of people picking, because if you look at how Vegas is kind of looking at this matchup, South Dakota State's only a 2-point dog. If we're a 13-4, that's way too close. The way the market's kind of valuing it. And
it feels like a gift, man, to take Providence -2, but also could feel like a trap. Like, you know what I mean? Like they're setting you up to fail here.
Exactly. So if we break down the matchup, right? So the storyline with Providence all year is that they are the luckiest team in America, meaning that every single game they've played has been very close, gone to overtime, gone to double overtime, and they just somehow they have, the basketball gods have their back and they end up pulling out the victory, right? So that could be a really good characteristic of a team where they can win games down the stretch. Or that could mean that, they play down to their competition and a team like South Dakota State, who they're supposed to be better than, can come in and kind of walk all over them, right? South Dakota State is a very tough matchup for anybody. They are a juggernaut on offense. They shoot the threes at a really high clip. They're actually the best three-point shooting team in the entire country. They get out in transition. Providence isn't the greatest transition team. The thing with South Dakota State is they're pretty poor defensively. So if Providence can get the ball inside of Nate Watson, be physical, they can have the advantage. I personally am on the fence here and am going to try to leverage this spot. I talk about leverage a lot. If I see South Dakota State, which it's looking like they're going to be a trendy upset pick, I'm going to go on the Providence side. If it's more like a 75-25 or 80-20, then I'm going to pick South Dakota State because, like you said, this kind of seems like a layup the way that the committee matched these two teams off.
Yeah, so I'm gonna lock in the Friars. I'm just gonna put them in to play Richmond. I understand though why we would wait a little bit longer just to get a little bit more of a feel of where the betting public is leaning to this, as well as from a bracket standpoint to kind of see where the percentages are. But this is the next matchup here with the Tigers playing the Iowa State Cyclones. I've been watching a little bit of Big 12 basketball throughout the season, but at the same time, I didn't really hear much about the Cyclones all year. And then I saw them getting a bid, and I was like, wow, like, is this like a conference bias thing? Or, so for me, I was already I didn't even look at the spread. I was just like, yeah, I'm going to take the Tigers to advance over the Cyclones. Is that something that you would probably advise against?
So this is another tough one, and this region is kind of like the region of death. Where
I was going to say, like, it seems like every matchup, it's difficult.
A lot of
to
things
feel
can happen.
In it.
Like this is one of those regions where you can see like a 12 and a 13 kind of go out into the Sweet 16 or Elite 8 or something like that. So breaking down this matchup and to answer your question on Iowa State, they actually started the year very strong. I think they were 12-0, 13-0, and they beat pretty good teams. They beat Memphis, they beat Xavier. They won at Iowa early in the year. So they got up ranked in the top 25, maybe top 20 at one point. And then they hit Big 12 conference play. And we all know the Big 12 is a buzzsaw, and they struggled a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think they had a sub 500 record in conference play, but they still kind of grinded it out to make the tournament as an 11 seed. I do kind of like them in this matchup, and the main storyline here is that LSU's coach,
Will Wade,
he just got fired.
Oh, I forgot about that when I was just talking about this now.
Who knows what the state of the mindset of those kids are, where they just had their head coach fired. They kind of stumbled down the stretch where they were very good defensively to start the year, and I think in SEC play they were maybe like 4th or 5th in SEC play defensively, and that's kind of their calling card. The thing with Iowa State is they play very pressurized defense. They get into passing lanes. They cause a ton of turnovers, and they not very good offensively, but they try to turn defense into offense. I think LSU could struggle with that a little bit. LSU does have the advantage inside. Tari Eason and Darius Days are both bulls down low. But if I'm going to pick a team, I'm going to go with the little better guard play, and I think Iowa State can take advantage of that, and especially if LSU's kind of in like a haze with the losing their head coach, I'm going to pick Iowa State to pull up the upset.
Yeah, fade the coach narrative, get the Cyclones in there. I feel like an idiot for even forgetting because not only that, it was like 2 years ago, like where Will Wade was going through some issues, or maybe it was last year. I just remember going into the tournament, I was like, man, I don't know if he's going to make it. And then forgot all about it, realized, he did end up coaching through. And then just before the tournament now, getting bounced. And
that's tough.
I can't fully endorse the Tigers bet at this point now that I just remembered that information. So, all right, Wisconsin Colgate. Obviously, Wisconsin, looked pretty good. Obviously coming from a much stronger conference. I know that Colgate could probably give them some issues maybe initially. I just think from an attrition standpoint, I think Wisconsin will just wear them down. I think Wisconsin moves on to this matchup to play Iowa State. Do you think we could? Do you think we need to talk about the Toothpaste College, or should we just look at Wisconsin here?
So I do kind of want to dive into the matchup a little bit. And it's more because Wisconsin kind of fits into the same mold as Providence does, where the metrics don't like them at all. And they have a really high luck rating where they've won a lot of close games throughout the year. So you could kind of get behind the narrative that they're way overseeded at 3. Same thing with Providence, way overseeded at 4. Can Colgate beat them? They absolutely can. They are lethal 3-point shooting team. The thing that worries me is that, they're kind of poor inside. You look at the Colgate has made the tournament the last 3 years, and this is probably the worst of the 3 teams that have made it. But they still have a lot. They have 3 starters back. All 3 guards can shoot the ball very well. If they can get hot against this Wisconsin team, that's not going to, kind of overwhelm them with like transition. They're kind of more of a grinded out team. I think Colgate can win. I'm probably going to have Wisconsin move on here just because I think Johnny Davis may have like a 30 and 15 point kind of game against this team. But it's not going to be easy, especially if Colgate gets hot.
What about from a betting perspective then? Because from a spread standpoint, if you're feeling like Colgate could maybe keep it close, do you think it's something that we could look at from a spread standpoint, or do you think it will just be one of those situations where Wisconsin leads by 4 and then just goes on like a 10-0 run and then you're mad for even taking the underdog spread?
Yeah, because of the variance of Colgate, right, where they're very 3-point reliant, I'm probably going to stay away, and I would probably want a better number. I think it's at 7.5 last time I saw it. I could be wrong. But I would want more points to back Colgate there, just basically because of the variance that they have. So, they could win or they can lose by 20.
That's what I was going to get at. It's like,
that's not the type of team you want to bet on,
No. So we're going to have Wisconsin move on to the next round, facing the Cyclones in the round of 32. USC and Miami. Now, Miami is always kind of one of those plucky teams. I don't really like to use that term very often, but it's just one of those teams that, like, athleticism, they always seem to just have good athletes on the wing, guys that just can shock you to be able to kind of overwhelm you in that standpoint. But, I mean, USC was an Elite Eight team, and really the main difference from this team from year over year is just Evan Mobley. Obviously they got some other players that were coming in, but, I mean, Evan Mobley is a big loss. I'm not going to just minimize, he's obviously like favored for rookie of the year right now.
He's having a great year, right?
But his brother and just the rest of the crew on that team are still playing fairly well in a conference in the Pac-12 that I thought was much more competitive compared to recent years. I feel pretty confident that USC is going to take down the Hurricanes. How do you feel?
So this is another game I have circled right now because I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's the classic bigs versus guards type of narrative where USC has a ton of length inside. Their interior defense is very good. Where Miami is very perimeter oriented. They have 3 guards that are all very, very good offensive players. Charlie Moore, Isaiah Wong, and Cam McGusty all can score at all 3 levels. In a tournament setting, I'm probably going to lean towards guard play over bigs. Another thing that kind of scares me, and it's kind of funny how the committee put all 3 of these teams in the same region, is that USC, the metrics don't really like them. They stumble down the stretch. They put a lot of close games against weaker competition. I'm leaning Miami now, but I still am trying to dig into the matchup a little more than what I'm going to do. I kind of have this whole bottom side of this region circled.
Sure. Well, and that's why
it seems like it's mayhem, and it's hard for me to figure out what I want to do. But right now I have Miami.
Yeah. So, all right. So one more overrule. Just I'm going to go with just the Trojans just on this one. I don't really feel like it's that big of an overrule, but at the same time, we'll just make sure, but this is where I'm getting a little tricky here is that I do think Auburn wins the first game, but I don't love them to go deep in this tournament. And obviously I'm, following the NBA draft, like obviously I'm very high on Jabari Smith and just overall the team that Bruce Pearl puts out there, especially over the last 2 to 3 years, getting some really unknown, like even just last year, like Sharif Cooper just looked amazing. Like I thought he was going to be like a lottery pick, like with how good he looked in certain games.
Very good.
But at the same time, I'm not sure if they were facing just even a little bit better of a competition, like maybe they're facing Wisconsin in the second round, I would probably take them to fade them in that spot. But I'm just not sure if I could take them to lose against USC. So I think I'm going to have Auburn move on to the Sweet 16. But at the same time, I don't love it. And I just want to know if you're feeling that same way about the Tigers this year coming into this tournament.
I do feel the same way, and they're kind of a shaky 2 seed. They struggled down the stretch. They struggled a lot away from home, right? They were juggernauts on home. They blew teams out, but when they hit the road or a neutral site, they kind of came back to earth a little bit. And their SEC schedule did favor them where they had the tougher teams at home, which made them look really good. But Auburn's Bruce Pearl is a great coach. Auburn is very talented. You already talked about Jabari Smith. They also have Walker Kessler inside, so it's almost impossible to score.
I didn't want to talk about Walker Kessler because I'm still mad that he couldn't make it work at UNC. And then as soon as he leaves, he averages like 10 blocks a game. And I'm just like, man, why could you not do that as a Tar Heel? Anyway,
Well, he probably could have. That front court is just so crowded, right? He would have played alongside Baycott, and who knows how that was going to work.
Sharp
right?
last year, yeah,
Exactly.
It's tough.
Exactly, it's tough. But yeah, their interior defense is elite. The problem with Auburn is that their guard play gets a little shaky at times. They kind of have that Arkansas mentality where they can make bad decisions and take 3-point shots from the logo when it's unnecessary. They do that a lot. That kind of bites them in the butt sometimes. So if they get a disciplined team, they could run into some problems. If they get matched up with USC here, I think they eliminate USC's advantage inside and they would move on. If they get Miami, Miami could make things a little interesting. I'm still looking at that matchup, but if you have USC here, I'm going to move Auburn on.
So the next one then with Iowa State and Wisconsin playing each other as the 3 seed and 11 seed. I know we talked about some of the deficiencies of Wisconsin and how the analytics crowd is not really a huge fan of them coming into the tournament. But I still feel like from a matchup standpoint, just based on what I've seen from Iowa State this year, I still think that Wisconsin can advance in this stage. Do you think Wisconsin – are you with me that you think Wisconsin, if they're playing Iowa State, will advance to the Sweet 16?
I'm actually on the other side, I'm sorry to say.
No, it's up, man. This is why you're the expert. I'm the casual here, man.
So I'm looking for an opportunity to fade Wisconsin in the tournament here. And, the KenPom metrics kind of back that. The shot quality metrics kind of back that.
And they would likely be favored in this matchup, too. Just so from an underdog standpoint, you'd probably be able to get a half-decent dog money line odds.
Yeah.
If you're going to get the Cyclones.
For sure. And, yeah, so I've been kind of waiting for that opportunity. And you always kind of see that one team in every tournament that's not good, but they just somehow get good matchups and they make it to the Sweet 16. I think that could be Iowa State this year. So their defense. So they're, like I said before, their defense is very pressurized. They get into passing lanes where Wisconsin isn't really an isolation, take it to the basket. Maybe besides Johnny Davis, who's a stud. But they run that swing offense where it's a lot of off-ball cutting and trying to get really good ball movement with their mobile bigs, where Iowa State is going to try to blow that up and force turnovers. And I think that could take Wisconsin out of the type of game that they like. And I think Iowa State can pull it out.
We have now moved in a different direction. We're saying F the Badgers and let's go Cyclones. I love it. So let's go back to the top of the bracket, Quan, because we might as well just go with Kansas, San Diego State pretty quickly here. I still think from an offensive and defensive standpoint that Bill Self's club should be able to take down San Diego State here. We talked about San Diego State just as far as how they've looked defensively this season, but we still probably feel pretty good about them getting past Creighton. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to beat the Jayhawks in this spot. Can we move Kansas over to the Sweet 16?
I think we can move Kansas over. It's not going to be easy, but I think the guard and wing talent overwhelms San Diego State for sure.
So the Richmond-Providence matchup, because again, you were pretty high on this Richmond upset and that potentially they could take down Iowa just because of how much love the Hawkeyes are getting coming into this tourney. And if that is the case, and they're playing the Friars here in a second-round matchup, I feel like both teams, we just kind of, I don't want to say we crapped on them, but, at the same time, we brought up their warts, some of the things that they don't do well and how they could be an issue here. In this potential matchup between Richmond and Providence, do you think the Providence Friars would have that kind of edge to be able to just advance to the Sweet 16 based on what Richmond would put on the court?
I mean, for me, Providence is in that same bucket as Wisconsin. I want to try to fade them when I can. And I don't know, maybe this Richmond team is the team of destiny. They made that magical run in the A-10 tournament. They got really good point guard. They're very well coached. They got guys who can score from different spots on the floor. I'm going to have Richmond pulling this one out and going to the Sweet 16.
Let's take the Mitch Richmonds. All right, now Kansas and Richmond. Do you still feel like now we're into the second weekend? This is when the big boys start to get going here. In Kansas, I usually trust them in this spot. I imagine if they were going to play Richmond in a matchup, if I'm just thinking of a hypothetical spread, I'm thinking at least 10 points. I still think that Kansas, I don't know if I would trust them to cover in a spot like this, but I do think Kansas has enough to get to the Elite Eight. Do you think Richmond will be a trendy team if this happens after the Sweet 16, that people will maybe getting on the board to want to fade Kansas here?
I don't think so. I think I would move Kansas here. Just a little bit on Kansas. They're playing their best basketball of the season. They're finally healthy. Remy Martin's back in the mix. David McCormack has been very up and down all year, but he seems to be engaged now, kind of right at the time Bill Self needs him to. And their defense has been improving, so I am on board with Kansas.
All right, let's move Kansas over to the next round. Now it is the matchup that I'm waiting for that moment of when we start to fade Auburn here. And I'm a little worried here because I'm looking right now. We have 2 1 seeds and a 2 seed make it to the Final Four. And I mean, I don't want to get caught up too in the logic of like, well, you can't take 1 seed just based on that. But I'm just looking at a matchup based on matchup. We might be looking at 3 1 seeds and a 2 seed making the Final Four based on the way that our bracket is playing out here. However, do you feel like the Cyclones would take down Auburn in this kind of scenario?
I think Iowa State's going to try to make this ugly, but I think the Auburn guards kind of thrive in that kind of environment. So, and Iowa State will get absolutely nothing at the rim in this kind of matchup. So, you know, we talked about how Auburn's a little shaky, but based off the matchups and this kind of weakness of this side of the region, I would have them moving on here.
All right, so let's move Auburn on, and then now we're looking at a 1-2 matchup in the Elite Eight of Kansas and Auburn. And man, like coming into this show, I was like, you know what? I'm probably gonna, if I was thinking of 1 seeds that would make it, it's like I don't know if Kansas is gonna make it here just based on the bracket here. But the way that the matchups are shaping up, we're looking at a 1-2. And again, kind of going back to this, like I feel like Kansas and Bill Self and that team could do enough to make sure that whatever Auburn's strengths are neutralized. And we're seeing Kansas again in the Final Four. Am I crazy to think that we're getting 3-1 seeds into the Final Four this year?
I'm on board with that. I have Kansas going to the Final Four as well. I think Bill Self finally breaks through after kind of having some mediocre success. This is one of his more talented teams top to bottom, and they're playing their best basketball at the right time. So I am on the Kansas train. If you couldn't tell by my jersey.
Well, I was so glossed over. Is there any player on it, or is it just Jayhawks?
No, so it is a throwback. Probably the worst ESPN analyst of all time, but very good basketball player. I'll let you
better
guess.
Not say Paul Pierce. I was just like, oh my God, don't say Paul Pierce.
It is Paul Pierce.
What? Oh wow! I mean. NBA legend, obviously a top 75 player.
Incredible player.
You know, I don't know if I would call him the worst analyst, but I would definitely say whenever the Celtics were playing, it always felt like, okay, you could take your hat off. You could take your Celtics hat off right now.
Or if you're live streaming strippers on your Instagram, it's probably not the smartest thing.
All right, so now we're looking at the Final Four. We have got Gonzaga coming out of the West region. We've got Arizona coming out of the South, Kentucky coming out, and Kansas. Big time matchups. This will do major rating. I mean, the Final Four is going to do major ratings no matter what. But if you're the committee and you're looking at TV deals and ratings, this is super ideal. Now, I will say, very chalky. Right now, these are actually all 4 teams that are favored to get out of their brackets. So there is a likelihood that I'm going to be wrong here, and that's okay. But right now, if I'm looking at Gonzaga and Kentucky, I think Kentucky wins that game, man. Like, I just think the backcourt play right now of Kentucky, just also with Oscar in the front court, I'm not sure if Chet Holmgren and Drew Timme are going to be able to defend him enough or at least keep him off the glass. I kind of like Kentucky to advance in this matchup. Hoodie aside, Homer aside, just looking at the matchup, am I crazy? I mean, really, it doesn't really matter. There's no upset at this point. But Kentucky to take down Gonzaga is not really that far-fetched. I think they're going to make it to the final. What do you think?
Oh, it's not far-fetched at all. And yeah, it does kind of feel bad that we have a little bit chalkier Final Four, but maybe that's contrarian, right? A lot of people are just looking for that upset. And, you know, you could be contrarian picking chalk. So it's not something to get too super hung up on. But yeah, these are great matchups. Both of these games are pretty much coin flips, or like at least 2-point swings. For me, I would definitely be on the Gonzaga side here, but you're not crazy in thinking Kentucky can win. Oscar can control the glass, and Gonzaga does give up some transition opportunities, and Kentucky plays their best when Washington and Wheeler are getting out and getting in transition and scoring easy buckets. I do think that Holmgren does give Oscar a little bit of trouble on offense, just from being like that weak side rim protector, right?
And even just the length, man. Like
yeah,
the length. You know, sometimes it doesn't really matter how high you jump. Like that used to be my case when I played basketball. I'm 6'2", but I would like have a good lift, everything, and then I'd be playing against a 6'10" guy, and he would literally just do this and be like, didn't even really have to try to block you.
Exactly.
You know?
And on the offensive end, I think the Zags just have way more shot makers than Kentucky does. But you know, you're feeling Kentucky. Let's move them on in your bracket. I don't hate it.
Let's get Kentucky now.
I got a nice
Arizona,
22-1 future on them, so I would love that happening.
Well, yeah, you got that at the beginning of the season. I think you have a couple as well on like Tennessee. I think you
Tennessee have a nice one. Arizona have a nice one too.
So speaking of Arizona and Kansas, this is actually one of the few times where I actually don't think I think Kansas could win this game, and I think Kansas is actually the type of team that I think that could take down the Wildcats in this kind of spot. I just feel like Arizona just has such an easy road just based on the teams that they have potentially to face with the talent they have. Whereas I feel like playing against a team like Kansas, this is the type of matchup where you're going to have a ton of people coming in and saying about how Arizona's going to romp, whatever else, and then the Jayhawks just come out and take care of business. I'm going to take Kansas to play Kentucky in the final. How you feeling about that?
I'm on board with that. I think that Kansas can deal with the transition attack of Arizona. Who knows how Arizona's backcourt is going to look like at this point of the tournament, if Chris is going to be 100% back or not. And I think this is the type of matchup that him not being there can be problematic for them because Kansas's backcourt is pretty solid. So, yeah, I would have Kansas coming out of this matchup as well.
All right. Championship game, Kentucky and Kansas. So much has to happen for this even to come to it, even though the fact it's a 1 and 2 seed playing each other. But honestly, man, I feel like this is – I've just been so high on Kansas. I don't know why. I just can't shake the Jayhawk bias in me, even though I am a Kentucky fan. I think Kansas wins this game. How do you feel about this kind of potential matchup with Kentucky facing Kansas in a national championship game in New Orleans?
Yeah, so this one's a little tricky if these two do get matched up in the championship. And I go back to that meeting they had earlier in the year where it was at Fog Allen. So Kansas was home, and Kansas is one of the best home environments in the entire country. And Kentucky just came out and absolutely blitzed them from start to finish. It wasn't even close. That's going to be back of my mind this whole time analyzing this matchup. Oscar was a problem for them. McCormack couldn't stay with him, his mobility. So I think if these two did get matched up, I would be leaning the Kentucky side just because I saw that happen earlier in the season. But for me, I have Gonzaga facing Kentucky in the championship, and I think Kansas matches up with Gonzaga pretty well. So I would have Kansas winning it. But in your bracket, your world, you're wearing the sweatshirt. Let's go with Kentucky.
Let's go Kentucky. All right, we're going to take Kentucky. Total points in the championship game. I always just default to I always just do 150. I don't know why. Maybe just I'm out to lunch with that. I just always think a 75-75 or like an 80-75 game and just try to get as close as I can. But it doesn't really matter if it comes down to that tiebreaker where I lose on a 150 point whatever tiebreaker, then I'll live with it. So big shocker here because I did not walk into this bracket thinking that Kentucky was winning the bracket. But just the way that we talked about it and we unfolded and we finally got to the final game, lo and behold, Kentucky Wildcats are winning it. So that is all for today. My bracket is now complete. I have got the Kentucky Wildcats winning it all. Shocker because I'm wearing their sweater. I'm going to be back on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern for Dawg Day Afternoon. Mike, you're going to come back and join me. We're going to give our 3 best bets of the NCAA tournament for round 1. You can follow me on Twitter at GDawg5000. Make sure to follow Mike at Mike Cutri CBB. He's also going to have his best bets posted daily throughout the tournament at FTNBets.com. So I want to thank you, everybody, for sticking around and watching Dawg Day Afternoon. Bon chance.